Y'all help me out here. As far as the blanks, what's the last one you have filled in? Oh, okay, so we got through all of page 1? All day. That's more than I thought. Okay, so that is where we're going to pick up. Having talked about the relationship of faith and knowledge and really delving into it, and having talked about the many phases and causes of unbelief. And so we started in on what is called the classical argument. This is a realm of what's called classical apologetics. And that would be the cosmological argument, and the idea that we're arguing for the existence of God, and the cosmological argument summed up in a 3-word phrase would be cause and effect. And so we talked about that either something is contingent or non-contingent. Let's see if we can revisit those thoughts. So if something is contingent, what does that mean? It depends on something else. So we talked about different examples of this and how this looks, about what is contingent and then things that are non-contingent. How many non-contingent things can you name? Non-contingent. That's a short list, right? 3? What? Okay, that's contingent though. What 3? What's that, Larry? Yeah, the Trinity, right? Or God, the 3 in 1. So you could say 3 or 1 and be right on that. That there, as far as non-contingent things, or non-contingent people, or non-contingent places, or things that exist, everything in our universe is contingent. It depends upon something else. And so we started looking into that, and if we talk about if the universe did not create itself, it must have had a cause. So here are the 3 possible logical answers that possible state of affairs that can be for explaining certain things. So you could say that the universe is eternal. It always has existed and always will. That is one logical possibility for explaining the existence of things. Then the other aspect of this is the universe is not eternal. And if it's not eternal, rather you have one position that says it rather created itself out of nothing. That's one position. The third position is the universe is not eternal, so we agree on that part, but we would say, and did not create itself out of nothing, but instead was created by something or someone outside of and superior to itself. So those are our 3 options. Can you think of another option other than those 3? That pretty much sums it up, right? There's no other possibilities. It's got to be one of those 3. Right? Right. So let's ask the question then, is the universe eternal? Because that was the first thing we were looking at. Is the universe eternal? Now the most comfortable position when we talk about this, is the universe eternal, for the person who does not believe in God, is the idea that the universe has always been here and always will be, because such an idea avoids not only the problem of a beginning or an ending, but also the need for any first cause, such as God. Now, we talked about this, and I hope I mentioned this. I'm trying to remember. There's a lot going on up here right now. So anyway, the term infinite regress. Remember, did we talk about the term infinite regress? Okay, well, let's talk about the idea of an infinite regress. So one of the things I love doing, and one of the cool toys I had when I was a kid, it was called Domino Rally. I don't know, and it was a set that came with these little plastic dominoes, not the playing kind, but the setup kind, the knockover kind. And then had little cool things with it with steps that had dominoes built into it, and then you could do all these creative, like domino displays where you set them up to knock them down, right? You guys ever seen those, like on the videos where it's just thousands of thousands? I mean, that's amazing when you get to see that. I love watching those. So think of the universe like that elaborate, huge domino display. In that, if we start at the end of all this that's been knocked over, so let's say that you show up on the scene and all the dominoes have been knocked over, then eventually if you started where it ended and then start tracing backwards how these dominoes fell on one another, eventually you're going to get to what? The beginning. What an infinite regress is saying that you'll never find the beginning. Is that you can keep going on in eternity past, and that there's never a beginning point. It's what's called an infinite regress. Now, when we talk about cause and effect, you cannot have an infinite regress. You cannot have. It's a logical impossibility, because at some point you will reach that alpha point, that beginning point. So, and there's always a starting point where we have to trace back to that moment or that thing or that cause. And so, if you can't have an infinite regress, then what you're going to have when we're considering the law of cause and effect, you're going to have what's called the first cause. The first cause. And so, or another way that it's used is an uncaused cause. Okay. Well, if we go to the second one there in that list, when we say that of the three things in the beginning, talking about that the universe is not eternal, meaning there is a first cause, but that first cause must also be uncaused itself, because if it is caused, then it is still part of the dominoes falling. So we need an uncaused cause, something that is greater than the first domino ticking over. And so we're going to explain how this all works. Your brain hurting? Okay. So we talk about the most comfortable position is this idea of the universe being eternal, so you don't have a need for a first cause, such as God. However, modern science recognizes that the universe is not eternal. So we have... I left my book in there. So, look over there. Keep looking. You say you don't fall for it? That's a lie. You know how many French fries I got off of her plate that way? Yeah, or bites of steak. Okay, so when we talk about the universe is not eternal. So modern science today, it's a conclusive fact that the universe is not eternal. So you can find secular scientist after secular scientist to say, yeah, the universe had a beginning point. Now, secular science has determined and called that what? The Big Bang, right? And so, in the Big Bang and the Big Bang Theory, not the TV show, you have this idea, basically, that all of the matter in the universe was condensed in a tiny speck, and then in a moment it exploded and everything kind of went out into its place, and then all this energy, and eventually things started cooling down and moving out and expand, all this kind of stuff. So the Big Bang Theory says that. So that's, it's a very crude, rudimentary explanation. Now, thinking about what we just discussed, what does this theory lack? It lacks a first cause. Because that speck is contingent. Everything contained within that speck is contingent. Unless, the only way it could be non-contingent if it was eternal. But if it has a starting point, it's not eternal. So the question I would ask is, if you are going to say that everything was contained in that point and then explode, okay, where'd the point come from? Answer me that. Because in that question, I'm looking for an uncaused cause or a first cause. Something that is not a part of that speck. Right? It has to be something outside of the speck. Something greater than. So eventually what we're going to get to is, this is kind of jumping way ahead, but I want to go ahead and put this out there for you. So in that moment when everything was created, or came into existence, we'll use that term at this point. What came into existence in that moment? What does science say came into existence that didn't exist and then began to exist? How's it described? Light. Okay, light is part of a larger category. Okay. Well, we're talking about creation would be one of the ways that these things could come into existence. But that's a little different. What I'm talking about, the things that came into existence. There's three major categories of things that they say came into existence at the moment that everything began to exist. Time, right? Right? Time. Matter. So who said light? Yeah. So light would be part of matter. What else? Space. Right? So if these things began to exist and they didn't exist, then something outside of these things that could be the first cause then would need to be. Time cannot be part of its existence because time began to exist. Matter cannot be part of its existence because matter began to exist. Space cannot be part of its existence because space began to exist. So whatever created has to be timeless, right? Has to be non-material. Has to be spaceless. And what do we know about the scope of the universe? Tinker toys in a kid's basement? Expansive? Is that that word kind of sets us on the road, doesn't it? When we consider about the scope of the universe. It's not infinite, but it's incredible. I mean, it's the scope of the universe. So, now, what do we observe in the universe about the nature of the universe? Is it orderly, complex, or is it organized and designed? We see things like, okay, so whatever created the universe or whatever began, then it must be incredibly what? Powerful. What else? Intelligent. Here's something else. This one's a little more philosophical in nature, right? Because all this makes pretty good sense so far, right? Yes? No? Okay. Is everybody with me thus far? Okay. If time, space, and matter came into existence, then whatever created them cannot be subject to time, cannot be matter, because then matter would have already existed, and it cannot occupy space. Right? So timeless, non-material, spaceless, powerful, intelligent. When we say intelligent, we mean the epitome of intelligence. Okay? Now here's something else. The universe exists because it was chosen to exist. And one of the characteristics of somebody choosing is this idea of will or volition. And will or volition is part of what's called a personal being. Remember, we'll go back to our studies on Sunday night. We talked about a being that is personal, right? So something must have chosen. So we have a timeless, non-material, spaceless, all-powerful, all-intelligent, personal being. Sounds like who? Right? Now, all of this equals a theistic universe. A theistic universe. This is where we're headed on the whole in determining these things. So, everybody with me to this point? Any questions? All right, cool. So, this is where we're headed, and this is going to get us to a theistic universe, one where it is absolutely created by God. So, modern science recognizes that the universe is not eternal, it had a beginning, and it will have an end. Now, how do we know this? Well, there is what we'll talk about here in a little bit, are the first and second laws of thermodynamics. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Did I get too far ahead? Yeah. So, among the most important and well-established laws of science are the laws of thermodynamics. Now, I want you to revisit this thought. How many scientific laws are there in general? You don't have to say 14. But how many are there in general? A lot. There are very few things that are considered scientific laws. Why? Okay, because for it to be a law, it has to be in every certain circumstance, in every time and place, it's a universal truth. So it doesn't change depending on time or place. And so for something to be a scientific law, it is firm. It's not going to be like one day they're going to be like, oh, we were wrong about that. Scientific law. Now, there's lots of scientific theories and ideas, but for something to be considered a law scientifically, it is absolute rock solid. So we're talking about the first and second laws of thermodynamics. Now, the first law of thermodynamics, often called the law of conservation of energy and or matter, states that neither matter nor energy can be created or destroyed in nature. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. The second law of thermodynamics, often called the law of increasing entropy, states that everything is running down or wearing out. Energy is becoming less and less available for use. So entropy is a word you probably don't use every day. You probably, I feel this myself, and that entropy is a real thing, and sometimes I feel its toll upon my being, that things are wearing down. So as a measure of randomness or disorderliness or unstructuredness is increasing, that of course means that eventually the universe will wear out. Now let's think about this for a moment. Any of you like architecture? Okay, so here in the United States, have you ever traveled to look at old architecture? Right? So when we come across an old building, what are we looking at here in the United States, time-wise? Well, I mean, time-wise, if we're looking at an old building here in the United States, how old is it? 250 years? Yeah. And then most times what's a condition of a building like that, unless it is constantly maintained, well, why would an older building need to be constantly maintained? Because things don't, as they sit, become more organized or clean, or things move from a state of orderliness. Yeah, I'm trying to think of another word. It's easier to say. They move from a state of, they don't get better, things deteriorate and get worse. That's a universal fact. And so the universe as a whole is experiencing that. And so when we understand that if that is the case, if everything is running down, and there's another way to think about this. So we could talk about the way that it's organized and the way that it's structured, that it's becoming less structured, but also think of it in terms of energy. So when the universe, it came to be, it started off with a full tank of gas, full to the brim. And what's happening is that energy is constantly decreasing. That is the second law of thermodynamics. So this is a law that we understand that once energy is expended, you don't get it back. You don't get it fully back. So right now, there is potential energy in this book. What's the potential energy in this book? Potential. Anybody know? Okay, so there's energy that's bound up in this that could, if it's ignited, that it could turn and burn, right? Turn into fire, and then that heat would be given off, that energy would be expended. What's another potential energy that's in this book right now? Yeah, so if I were to let go of this, what would happen? So there's only so much energy, and especially when you think in terms of heat, in the universe. And so at some point, everything you're going to hit E on the gas tank. Now, if the universe is eternal, then what would have already happened? The tank could be empty. See, if we're thinking about eternal, that means it's always existed, and the tank's running down, then those two things don't go together. There's no such thing as an eternal gas tank when we know that it's running down. So if it's running down, then we know that if we were to track all the expended energy throughout history, and we were to put it all back together, just trying to track it, we would eventually be able to say, oh, okay, here's where it started out. Because again, we can't have an infinite regress. There has to be a point when the tank was full, if it's slowly emptying. Same thing with the orderliness of the universe. It's becoming less orderly. And so eventually things, as they wear down, and secular scientists talk about the term, is it heat death? Yeah, heat death. That the universe is just eventually going to turn, the energy will expand, and then everything is just going to sit there like without any energy. Everything's just going to decay to the point of utter destruction. That's what secular scientists say. So if that is the case, then that does indicate clearly that the universe began to exist. Now, the first law of thermodynamics says that you can't, that matter cannot be created or destroyed. It just changes form. So again, like this. What was this? Most likely it was from tree pulp, right? And so, now, could we take this and get the tree back? No. Once that's done, that's done. And again, if we were to set fire to this, then this matter here would release its energy, would give off that heat, and then we could not reconstruct that to give us back the energy and or reconstruct the matter. We're not going to get anything more or less than what already is. It just changes forms. Still there, it just changes forms. Yes. So gases will be given off, then the particles and everything. So everything just changes form. So we don't create any matter. We don't lose any. It's what's there is there. And once the energy is expended, so first and second laws of thermodynamics really are a powerful explanation for the beginning of the universe, that it did begin to exist. So if it did begin to exist, then what do we say about the universe being eternal? It's not possible. It's not an option. So out of those first three things, we can cross that off. Right? Those first three statements, universe is not eternal. So if we go back to the second law, it points to a beginning when, for the first time, the universe was in a state where all energy was available for use, and an end in the future where no energy will be available, referred to scientists as heat death, thus causing the universe to die. In other words, now will the universe die? No. Why do we? Now we're moving off into theological circles here now. So we're moving from apologetics to theology. Warren says, no, the universe will not die of heat death. What's your reason for that? Yes, because what is the end of all things? When he comes back, but what does it say is going to happen to the earth in this present universe? It's going to be consumed by fire. Now, that's a different kind of heat death than what they're talking about here, but if things were allowed to head that direction, that would happen. And there's nothing wrong with saying that would happen, but we know it won't. We know it won't because Jesus is going to return at some point before that happens. Hopefully soon. So, in other words, the universe is like a giant watch that has been wound up, but that is now winding down. The conclusion to be drawn from the scientific data is inescapable. The universe is not eternal. You may have heard of scientific studies. Turn on the news and say, well, we know the universe is expanding. Right? Well, if the universe is expanding, and we think about an infinite regress, so what does that mean? Look at it in reverse. If something's expanding, that means at one time it was, if you go reverse, yeah, so if it's expanding. Now, this one, I can't wrap my mind around this. So don't ask me to explain it. So space itself is expanding. Into what? You see what I'm saying? It's like we think, well, if I take that spray insulation stuff and I spray it into a box, it's going to spread out until it fills the box, or get outside of that box and get all over my hands. That stuff is sticky. You do not want to get it on you. And don't use the spray foam insulation to try to fill wood borer bee holes. Bad idea. Bad idea. Yeah. What's that, the universe? Yeah. So everything is moving away. So when astronomers do their thing and everything is moving away from a central point, they're trying to, that kind of thing, then now here's the way that I like to think about that. When we think about everything that it's moving away from the central point, like if you took and dropped a rock into the middle of a lake and you watch from that central point, those perfect ripples that go out from, you kind of think of it like that. So if you were to follow that first ripple all the way back to that point, that would be the origin of that, right? So I kind of think of if that, again, I can't explain it, because what's it expanding into? I don't know. I can't wrap my mind around that. But I like to think of that beginning point in an anthropomorphic kind of a way, that being the mouth of God where He spoke everything into existence. It's like from His mouth, from the power of His words, the universe was spoken to existence, and then everything. I do think that when He spoke, that everything was created in that moment and did kind of move out into its place in this one powerful, that's the way I think of deep space light, which again, don't ask me to explain deep space light, because that one is a very difficult subject for me. We may tackle it near the end of the class. We'll see how it goes. But to think of that point, that alpha point being the mouth of God itself, is kind of a cool thought. I can't prove that. That's just an opinion. So, the universe is like a giant watch. Now, the famous scientist Robert Jastrow, who is an agnostic at best, but an atheist. This was an atheist who wrote this book. His name was Robert Jastrow. He said he was a member of NASA. He wrote, "Modern science denies an eternal existence to the universe." Modern science denies eternal existence to the universe. He is correct. We know scientifically that the universe is not eternal. He has some other quotes that I really enjoy. One of my most favorite quotes from Robert Jastrow. Yeah, his book, I think, is called God and the Astronomers. I should have marked this better. So, I did mark it. How about that? So, in this book, talking about Robert Jastrow suggested this when he ended his book, God and the Astronomers, with this classic line, quote, "For the scientist who has lived by faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream." Talking about a secular atheistic scientist. "He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak, and he pulls himself over the final rock, and he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries." What he's saying is that theologians that have looked at the universe with a biblical worldview have been sitting at the top of this mountain of understanding that God created everything, and that which makes sense of the universe. And here we have these secular scientists who have been scaling these mountains of ignorance and trying to find out the answers to everything. When they get up there, here are the theologians that have been there all along. If they'd have just listened to them, things would have been a lot easier on them in their search for truth. I love that quote. So, we know scientifically that the universe is not eternal. Now, there's a lot more evidence for this. There's a lot more evidence for this that we could spend time looking into. There's things called the great galaxy seeds. There is what's called, there's certain kind of radiation that's being emitted since the beginning point of the universe. And this radiation that's been detected also points to the beginning point of the universe not being eternal. And then Einstein's theory of general relativity also points to, in fact, I want to make sure, I'll look this up. But I think when Einstein was working on the theory of general relativity, he realized that it did in fact show that the universe was not eternal. And so when he first reported this understanding of the theory of relativity, he fudged the numbers so that it would not look eternal. But then it was found out that he, quote, made a mistake or fudged the numbers, and then when the truth came out, that the theory, the general of general relativity, that in fact it does show that the universe itself is not eternal. Now, did the universe, is the next question, create itself out of nothing? Now, the first one, is the universe eternal? That seems like a legitimate possibility. Because for a long time, this was the position of those who didn't believe in God, is that the universe itself was eternal. So if you go back into ancient days and stuff, if you had people that opposed God, or they might have believed in the universe itself being eternal, because that seems, before there was certain understandings in knowledge, when we talk about the theory of general relativity or the background radiation from what they call the Big Bang, or these other things that scientifically now absolutely show that the universe had a beginning, before all that stuff was available, the fact that, or the possibility that the universe was eternal was a legit thing. I mean, that seems like a logical possibility. Right? I mean, I hope you agree with me on that. It seems like a logical possibility. Now we know what we know. It's not a possibility. But until these things have come to light through the scientific process, it was a logical possibility. Now, it's not so much so. But when you read this next sentence, did the universe create itself out of nothing? I mean, this seems like, really? I mean, come on. Did the universe create itself out of nothing? I mean, it doesn't even seem like a logical possibility, does it? I mean, it's almost like, why are we even wasting our time on this? Well, let's just think from someone who's an atheist, who is not going to allow for any kind of outside of the box thinking. When I say outside of the box, remember what we're talking about, something that is supernatural. We're not going to allow the supernatural possibility at all, so we must find an explanation that does not allow the God hypothesis in the door. And so, no reasonable, rational scientists in this day and age can hang their hat on the universe is eternal. So what do they have to do? What do they have to do? What's their options now? If we're not allowing God or something supernatural as a possibility, and the universe is not eternal, then our only option, remember, go back to those first three things, right? When I asked you, are there any other options? Are there? So if it's not eternal and science says so, and you're a secular scientist, what are you left with? And there's no way it's God, not allowing that. What are you left with? You're left with this. And so that's what science is attempting to do right now, is to prove that the universe created itself out of nothing. You familiar? You may have heard the term string theory or the multiverse theory, that there's multiple universes, which is a ridiculous thing because if you understand the idea of an infinite regress, if they were to prove that there were 100 million universes, right? Well, then there had to be a first one. There had to be one out of that 100 million, right? You can't have an infinite regress. You still haven't answered the question, how can something come from nothing? And so when you look at people like Richard Dawkins and Stephen Hawking, that's what they're attempting to do, is to prove scientifically that the universe created itself out of nothing. Now, they head to gravity itself as kind of like their hope, that gravity is the necessary force that brought everything into existence, that gravity, and there's some other things that they attempt to do, but this is where they head. Did the physical universe create itself out of nothing? Right. Well, supposedly. I mean, that's the obvious understanding for now. None of us here are astrophysicists or physicists in general that would be able to really get down to the bottom of that. But the layperson's look at that would say, well, obviously gravity is tied to matter. So, and I don't claim to understand all their theories. I just know the general presuppositions and kind of the underlying things that they're trying to look for. They're grasping at straws, is what they're doing. No. Right. But that's what they're trying to show. That's what they're trying to prove. And have there been any major breakthroughs in that area? Will there be? No. Now, in the past, it would have been practically impossible to find any reputable scientist who would be willing to suggest that the universe simply made itself. So prior to the universe being eternal, that being a possibility, and now that that's debunked, during that time period, if you were to walk up to someone and say the universe created itself out of nothing, they'd look at you like you're nuts. But now that the universe is conclusively not eternal in the secular scientific community, this is our only option. So every scientist, as well as every schoolboy, understood the fact that no material thing can create itself. Now, have we ever observed in any scientific realm that's been recorded in any scientific study, journal, or anywhere that's been reported that something created itself out of nothing? Has that ever been recorded? Now, had it happened, had somebody conclusively prove and observe something that created itself out of nothing, would that be a big deal? I'd be on the front page of every magazine, on the first thing on every story, say, oh, there it is, spontaneous generation. All right? But it's never happened. So, the universe is the created, not the creator. And until fairly recently, it seemed that there could be no disagreement on this point. However, so strong is the evidence that the universe had a beginning, and thus a cause superior to itself, that some unbelieving scientists have suggested that the universe literally created itself from nothing. Now, let's take a few minutes here, and I want to do something, and I don't have an eraser. You know what? We'll save it for next time. Oh, wait. Ha ha ha! Yeah, you got to be smarter than the board. Okay. Now, what we're doing here with the cosmological argument is we're going to be using a tool of logic called a logical syllogism. Okay, so we're going to actually look at that some in your notes later, but this is kind of how it works. So I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but I want to go ahead and get this out there. So Aristotle came up with this, and this is a real thing, and it's important, and it's a very good tool of logic that works. So I'm going to give you an example of what it is. So you have your first line that establishes a universal truth. Right? Make sure I say this right. All humans are mortal. Agree or disagree? Disagree. Are all humans mortal? Well, does everybody go and die? So if you ask anybody on the street, all humans are mortal. Universal truth, right? Some of you look hesitant to agree with this statement. Okay, all right. Yeah, immortal would mean that. Yeah, okay. So this was our friend Aristotle that then said Socrates is human. Right? So, was Socrates human? Yeah. So he wasn't an aardvark, he was human. So this works and this works, right? So then, what logically follows is therefore Socrates is mortal. Okay, does this work logically? All humans are mortal. Socrates is human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This is what's called a logical form called a syllogism. So what we're actually doing with the cosmological argument is this. Okay, so what we're starting off with. Now I've provided you some on the following pages, but we're not going to get there yet. We've started off with some universal truths. So the simplest one is the last one is, I'm going to see if I can fit this in here, is everything that begins to exist has a what? Has a cause. Right? Is there anything uncaused that exists? Everything that exists has a cause. Everything is contingent. Right? Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Right? And so then we're talking about what? The universe began to exist. Therefore what? Therefore the universe has or had a cause. So here we say it had a beginning. The universe began to exist or has a beginning. So therefore the universe has a cause. This is a logical form. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Is that true? Okay, now when we get to the universe began to exist, then this is where we settle in and find evidence for this. There has to be evidence for this statement. So what have we already determined? through our discussion tonight? Have we determined that the universe began to exist? Is there ample scientific evidence? I just gave you a few examples, right? First and second law of thermodynamics, right? So we've provided, so this is a true statement. So if this is true and this is true, then this has to be true, right? It logically follows. You cannot say, therefore, the universe did not. It has to be this form. So this is, in a nutshell, the cosmological argument for the existence of God, logically. So everything that begins to exist has a cause. Could you tell somebody that? Could you share that with somebody? Somebody says, there is no God. There is no God. There's no way you can prove it. Just ask them the question. Is there anything that has spontaneously generated? Is everything that begins to exist has a cause, right? You could say, where'd you come from? Well, my mom and dad, right? What about, do you have a puppy? Where'd the puppy come from? What about that chair? Everything that begins to exist has a cause, right? That's an easily understandable concept. Now, then, with the power of Google at our hands today, right? You could just type in, is the universe eternal? And you know what you're going to get? You're going to get a lot of scientific evidence. No, it's not eternal. And they're going to call it, in secular terms, what? What are they going to call it? The Big Bang, right? So the universe began to exist. Well, using this understanding, then you can say, well, then the universe has a cause. It can't have just happened on its own. It has to be caused. So then you can move from there as to, well, what caused it? And so this is giving us, now we're going to look at some more involved syllogisms that have some more statements because of what we're talking about here that are a little more detailed. But did the physical universe create itself out of nothing? So either we talked about naturally, that scientists have suggested that the universe literally created itself out of nothing. That's happening now. Well, naturally, such a proposal would seem absurd because the basic principles of physics establish that the creation of something out of nothing is impossible. Be that as it may, those who do not believe in God have been willing to defend it. This suggestion, of course, is in clear violation of the first law of thermodynamics, right? First law says that all the matter that exists. There's no more, no less. Okay. Which states that neither matter nor energy may be created or destroyed in nature. As Robert Jastrow again put it, our atheist friend, the creation of matter out of nothing would violate a cherished concept in science, the principle of the conservation of matter in energy, i.e. the first law of thermodynamics, which states that matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Matter can be converted into energy and vice versa, created or vice versa, but the total amount of all matter and energy in the universe must remain unchanged forever. It is difficult to accept a theory that violates such a firmly established scientific fact, end quote. So furthermore, science is based on observation and reproducibility and empirical data. But when pressed for empirical data that document the claim that the universe created itself from nothing, where do you think our scientist friends are with empirical data showing that the universe created itself from nothing? What do they got? They got nothing. Zilch. Unbelievers are forced to admit that no such evidence exists. The universe did not create itself. Such an idea is absurd, both philosophically and scientifically. And that is where we're going to leave off tonight, and we're going to pick up on our third point, and then we're going to settle into those more complex syllogisms. This was the most basic one. This was the most basic one, but then we're going to talk about the third possibility is, was the universe created? So if it's either eternal or it's not eternal and created itself, or it is not eternal and was created by something outside of itself and therefore greater than itself. So we're going to ask the question, was the universe created? Okay, any questions, any thoughts that you have to this point? I kind of like this stuff. I hope you do too. I hope, if nothing else, if this, I mean, you may or may not ever have a conversation where you can use this. You might. But at the very least, this should strengthen your own faith. Because this makes sense. Right? You don't have to be a rocket surgeon, as some would say. That's really messing it up. A rocket surgeon or a brain scientist to see that this makes sense. Okay. Any questions, comments, sly remarks? You've got a bunch. You'll tell me later.